again, this is the first time I've done this from my Indianapolis home. I split my time between two locations, and so um, this is great. But if you haven't been to the Kelton House Museum and Gardens, it is in downtown Columbus, Ohio. It's on the east side of Columbus, in the heart of the Discovery District, and I think they call it the cornerstone of the East Town Street District. So we are. We've been around since 1976, and I will just share my screen and we can get started. So I want to see if I go back the screen. But we have been around, like I said, since 1976. So the Kelton House Museum and Garden, we're part of the Junior League of Columbus. We are considered a community service project of the Junior League of Columbus. There have been 3 generations of Kelton that lived in the house, and it's an 1852 Greek Revival style home. It also has a little bit of Georgian influence and a little bit of Italian and Victorian thrown in. And it's at 586 East Town Street. Sorry, Melissa, I think I told you at one time it's 583. I've only been the director for about 9 months now. And so we used to have 2 offices. So our other address was 583. So I think I sent you the wrong information at one point. But anyways, 586 East Town Street. The last Kelton was there until 1975. She was the 3rd generation to live in the house, and she died at the age of 94. She moved in when she was 7 years old, and she lived there, obviously most of her life. She was a single woman, never had children, and she then donated the house to the Columbus Foundation and all the other lots, and it all went to the Columbus Foundation, and they had 6 months to find somebody to take care of the house. And if they didn't, the house was to be bulldozed. Thankfully, it did not happen. Whoops. So I'm going to give you a very quick overview of the house, and then we'll get into kind of the meat of my program. It's a 10,000 square foot house, and all of those 10,000 square feet, except for the attic, is open to the public. But the attic is used for other things, storage and collection space and things like that. So we have a lovely sitting room and a hallway that connects it. The sitting room has now been changed into a gift shop because it's right inside the front door. We have a grand staircase. There's 25 stairs in between each floor, and those stairs, and because we have 12, almost 13-foot ceilings throughout the house. So a little sitting area at the bottom of the steps as well in the grand hall. Of course, with any Victorian home, we have a front parlor with Rococo stylings and things like that, Duncan Fife tables and the whole thing. It is quite grand. Back parlor. We talk more about the family life in the back parlor. This is the dining room. The dining room is one of our visitors' favorite rooms. The table service is always amazing, and I haven't even started counting how many different table services that we have. Sophia Kelton used to paint china, and they had a kiln in the house originally, so there's a lot of china in the house. We have 2 bedrooms on exhibit, this being one, part of one. And then going back, I think Leslie Blankenship's going to be on this call at some point, and on the picture is one of her favorite people. So one of our other bedrooms, that is the master bedroom, but then also some of the other items we have throughout the house. So meet the Keltons. This is Sophia and Fernando Kelton. These are some, a lot of the times when I started working here, we used their portraits a lot. I love these photos of them. I think people pay for cheekbones like Sophia's now, but they were married in the early 1930s. They built this house in 1852, and they had 7 children. Charles died in 48, so he was never in the house. and then the rest of the children all lived into adulthood. They were third cousins that they got married, and ironically, Frank also married his cousin, and that was his second cousin that he married. But going through these things, I find all of this information and all these stories that we tell of Sophia and Fernando, but finding the documentation that backs it up is been kind of a challenge. Our other most favorite people that lived in the house were the Lawrences. So the Keltons lived there. They built the house in 1852. Their son, Edwin, ended up inheriting the house. I went back a screen again. So Edwin inherited the house, and then he had 5 daughters. And then his daughter, Grace, then inherited the house. And she was the one that ended up donating it. So 3 generations lived there. And it was all Keltons all the time, except for the Lawrences. So the Lawrences are the only other family that has a consistent history or a constant of any time period history. Even the staff that was there that lived there, nobody lived there for as long as Martha Lawrence, for sure. Martha's story is that she escaped slavery in 1864 from Powhatan, Virginia. And I believe I spelled Powhatan, I missed a W in there. But she was born in Virginia, born a slave. And she had at least one brother named John Aurelius Artway, and she had a sister named Pearl. So when she was approximately 10 years old, she escaped from Virginia somehow, which we don't know how. She makes it to Columbus, Ohio, and she's found in the bushes of the Kelton House. So she's there, and we're not sure how she gets there. She's with her sister Pearl, and that's the story of her, how she got there. So she ends up living there. She's not living as a servant. She's never on the payroll. She's living with the family as part of the family. In 1873, Thomas Lawrence starts working for the Keltons, and they become members of the Second Baptist Church. They get married in 1874 in the front parlor of the Kelton House by Reverend Poindexter. So these are all the stories that we know about the Lawrences. So in 1999, there was a marker placed in our front yard, and lots of work went into it. And I believe this was the only second one in Ohio that was placed. And it's done by the Friends of Freedom. And this is not part of the National Park Service Network to Freedom, but it is a very, it's a very solid piece of history that we refer to, we talk to, neighbors walk by, visitors walk by, and it's a historic marker that people read. So when I started working here, I read all this and I go, my gosh, they're ardent abolitionists. How do we know that? Okay, so we know it through family traditions, and if you're all speed reading through the entire plaque that we have, there's a lot of really interesting things. The family says that escaped slaves were held in the 300-barrel cistern in the yard. She has a sister, Pearl, that's with her. Pearl felt unsafe, felt Ohio was unsafe, and Pearl continued north. So then she marries Thomas, and he's born of free Black parents. He's a cabinet maker, and the children are named after the Keltons. So I slowly started to take this and go, okay, how do we know these things? And where's the documentation? So as a museum person, I go, where's the primary source documents? Now that's always going to be different in whatever you do. And I trust the information that comes in. The people that have been working and volunteering at the Kelton House or the Junior League of Columbus are incredibly intelligent people. But I'm always skeptical about history. You read things in books and things, and I just want to know, where did that story come from? So trust but verify. Now, it's a little bit different when you're talking about African American history, because there's not as much written down, and that's much of the problem. This is an interesting document from Family Search, and a lot of the things you're going to see today are coming from Family Search. But along the top, it has name in full, and it has boxes that you could check off. W for white, F for free, S for slave. And you know, this is a death record. And you notice all the S's down the row are all S's. So we see all the S's here because there were slaves. Free people, there wasn't any free people of color, and then white people. The next row, or the column after that, this is the name of the slave owner, male or female, when they died, and then what they died of. But what you're finding is they only have first names. Lizzie, Billy, Meredith, Henry, William Allen. Oh, he was white. Fanny, Edward, Thomas. So some of them do have names, and this is not specific to the Hartways. This just happens to be a record from 1855 from Virginia, from the county that she lived in, that Martha lived in. But it's interesting. Instead of looking for Martha Hartway, we'll be looking for anybody named Hartway, and that would probably be in the owner file, not necessarily in the name file. So it is quite different from looking for African Americans in history. So, but we do have about the Lawrences. Once they got married, I'm looking for, instead of talking about Martha Hartway, now I'm talking about the Lawrences because that's her married name. So now I'm still looking for her, and we find out stories from the family, and the stories from that have been perpetuated over time is that the Keltons educated Martha, and they helped her. They helped her with many things, and then Thomas works for them, and then Thomas lives with them, and all of these wonderful things. But from the census records, it comes up with a lot of information. Of course, there's going to be a lot of misspellings and things like that in the census records. They're not always 100% true, but what's new and what have we learned from this one document alone? Age. We're getting pretty close to finding their correct age, except it has Thomas born in 58, which we know is not true. He was actually born in 48. Because if he was born in 58, he was only 15 years old when he got married. We don't think that's true. Martha is on here. So it's Thomas had a household, Sadie's the daughter, Martha's the wife, Arthur is the son. They're Black. They have a B. It was a W or a B. And then male or female and all of those things. And I'm sure many of you as historians or historical people have looked at census records before, but that's the one specific. Things that jumped out for me for this specific census record is they were the only African Americans living in their neighborhood. It wasn't a segregated neighborhood. And so that was quite interesting to me. Also, when you get down to this end over here, it shows that Thomas, his daughter Sadie, and his son Arthur could read and write, but Martha did not. So it says, can they read and write? Yes, for almost all of them, but Martha never did. So that takes that story a little different. But I don't always believe everything I read in the census record. So we do more research on that. And one way we do that is by going to family stories and family history. So what do I do from here? I contact the great-granddaughter of Martha Hartway, and she did indeed confirm, yeah, she was told her great-grandmother never could read or write. So now what do we know about Thomas? Where we find his death record. Now, all of these records were not in the building at the museum when I first started working there. Everything has been researched since then because there's stories and there's information, but the primary source documents were never saved. So somebody would write an article or a story, but it wasn't at the Kelton House and with all of our archives. So creating this information is quite important for all of our future work. So what was Thomas Lawrence, a little snapshot into his life. He was male, he was colored, and he was married to Martha Lawrence. Has his age on here. He was a janitor, and he worked at Buckeye Steel Casting. We knew he was a janitor at some point, and that was the last place he worked. But we also do know that he is listed as a porter in 1873 for Mrs. S.L. Kelton, and he boards the same. So he's living in the same house, presumably as Martha, in 1873. It also has on here the birthplace of his parents, because we were told that he was born of free Black parents. And what it does show on here, that his birthplace of his father is Virginia, birthplace of his mother is also Virginia, which is different from the census records. So again, we can't always believe what we hear or what we see, but this was quite interesting because birthplace of his father says Virginia. But this wasn't written by Thomas, this was written by his son. So it could have been, he was mistaken. Going back to the census records, it has his father being born in Ohio. So, which came from Thomas giving that information. So that was probably the more accurate information. So knowing Stephen Lawrence probably lived, and I say probably, most likely was born in Ohio. In Cadiz, Ohio, which actually had a free Black community in that area. So where did they get married? That's another story we have. So we have information of, the first thing is, when did they get married? Easy enough, look it up in the marriage books at the public library. Thomas Lawrence marries Martha Hardaway. Notice her name is misspelled with an extra A in it. October 30th, 1874. So we have that defined in the marriage logs. A little bit more is we have their marriage license. The biggest problem with this, though, is it's incomplete and it doesn't list the witnesses or actually who did the marriage. So it was not filled in by Reverend Poindexter. So that's still a mystery, but we have no reason to discount that piece of information. The story is Reverend Poindexter married Martha Hartway and Thomas Lawrence in the, and her name is also spelled with an A there, which makes it into that book. But it goes to show us that we don't have it here, but we do know from church records that they were members of the Second Baptist Church. So it makes sense that that's who married them. And just a personal aside, I love to see Thomas Lawrence signed this document, his marriage license. Martha's signature is not there, but he just had to sign that says he's 21 and she's 18, and they can they can legally get married, and then he signs off. Their children, they have two children. They had more children, but two of them lived to be adults. Sarah Sadie Ella Lawrence and Dr. Arthur Kelton Lawrence. And on that plaque that we started with, it stated very clearly that the children were named after the Kelton children. Ella is their second daughter, and Arthur was their sixth son. And then obviously with that middle name Kelton, which is actually the name he chose to live by, he always went by Kelton. He did not go by the name of Arthur. So what can we prove? Going back to that plaque, are they ardent abolitionists? We don't know. We know they had abolitionist feelings. The word ardent is very specific. Knowing that they helped at least one person named Martha escape slavery, that would give us a pretty good clue, but it's not proof. It could have been a one-time thing with her and maybe personal friendship with her. Family traditions. Yes, we can go back to these family traditions, not only talking to the Kelton family, we can talk to the Keltons and talk to them and find out how, what you knew and how that went. But more importantly, are the stories that came down through the Lawrence family and being able to keep track of family members um, and find out their stories and listen and find out the stories that they've been passed down and learn from them, which has been a huge help that we have that family history and that we can have those conversations still. Were the Keltons part of an anti-slavery society? We're not sure. There's no, we can't find it. There hasn't been any records found in the Columbus area. So it's not that we can't find their names in the Columbus area, is that we can't find records in the Columbus area that have been kept. 300 barrel cistern, is that where in the 300 barrel cistern just east of the house? Now this came from a Kelton family story, which is quite interesting. Even more so is when they had to tear up the yard for work on the sewer system. No 300 barrel cistern was found. So that's something we cannot prove. Sister Pearl. Yes, through family stories. We talked to people that knew Aunt Pearl. So yes, I've been able to verify that. She felt she was unsafe. Could never prove what somebody felt. Free Black parents. Yep, found that in the records. Was he a cabinet maker? Not sure. Family called him a cabinet maker, but the family also says we never knew he was a janitor. And so nothing that we have found in our records, they list him as a porter, a hostler, a footman, many different things, a butler he was listed as, and a janitor. Most of those were for the Keltons, and that they named their children after the Keltons. So yes, a lot of this stuff we could surmise, a lot of the facts in here, but yes, we're still doing history. So that's why I call this What's New in History, because there's always things that are new. We start with what we know, and then as we grow and as resources grow, we make sure that we can continue the research and keep it going. I did want to put this picture in here as well. Although we don't know if Thomas worked specifically as a carpenter, this is one of the pieces in the house. This is the cornice over the front parlor window. And it was originally the bed of Sophia Kelton. And at one point, Sophia said, "Oh, Thomas," and of course I'm making this up, sort of, she said, "Oh, Thomas, I'm so tired of my bed. Could you please do something else with it?" And this is what he did. He took the headboard of the half-leister bed and created the front parlor corbel or a cornice. And then the side window became, or the footboard became the side window cornice. And then in the back parlor were the other two. So were the side rails made for the other two windows. So yes, we do know that Thomas did fine work at the house. Cabinet maker, though, we're still working on. So there's my information. But I just want to go back a little bit, and then we can have more of a discussion. I'm hoping you all have questions and things. But I want to go back a little bit just to talk about the research of African-American history and how different it is than maybe doing, say, the Kelton history, because names have been erased. There's also court cases that said you can't even, your property, you're not even allowed to have a name. And so without having names, it makes it very, very difficult. Besides searching for Martha's story and Martha's family, I've done research on a gentleman named Old Charlie. And I can provide a link for that if anybody's interested at some point. But me and some colleagues wrote a paper for the National Park Service Network to Freedom on Seeking Charlie, trying to find somebody who has no last name, just a first name, and we know nothing else about him. And trying to find a gentleman in history with just a few pieces of information. We did whittle it down to about 4 people, then we found new information and had to throw all of our research out and start over. But we were able to track down 4 specific Charlies throughout history in the state of Illinois and give them more of a family history and more of a cohesive story that we can find bits and pieces of them throughout time in order to find out more information. So records like this are incredibly important, and it does give that starting point of Cadiz, Ohio, of birthplaces and where to know. But with Sarah having no maiden name, that makes it very difficult. Hopefully we can keep that history going. But all the things that we learn are always very important. And it's important to share. It's important to share that what we know in Columbus, Ohio is relevant. What Wilbur Siebert did in Ohio in the 1800s provides more clues for all of this. But having the information once or having it multiple times and then be able to share it with other people is much more important, so other people can find their history and find out what's new in their history. So I'm going to open that. I'm going to stop my share, my screen share, and see my chats. So if anybody has any questions about any of the people that I've talked about today and how that research is done, I'd be happy to answer anything.
Yeah, there's no questions in there yet, but
yeah,
you have such a diverse background in this industry. Can you tell us a little bit about your work history, your background?
Yeah, it is a little different from most people in museums, which is kind of fun that way. I started my career in a zoo, and I know I see the face there, but so I went to college for not for museum science or for history or public history or anything like that. I went for forestry and wildlife science. My plan in life was to work in a zoo the rest of my life, and I was so excited. And I started working in a zoo, and from there, I realized you have to feed animals 365 days a year. And at some point, I didn't want to work every Christmas. So my life changed. Whoops, kicking my desk. My life changed and things got a little different. And from there, one day I walked into a museum in 2009 after having a couple of careers, including event planning and volunteer management. And a lot of my job at the zoo was volunteer management, specifically working with court-order community service people. And it was a whole different world, walking into the museum world. And there was a whole different life there. So I started as a program coordinator. And then I was hired by an economic development group and historic preservation organization. So I left the museum world where I was doing research and went to the economic development group and rebuilt a downtown and kept the historic structures and repurposed them. And then I was hired back to the museum as their executive director, worked there for a number of years, I did a giant folk art exhibit, which one of my museums that I ran was a folk art museum, and it was and an Underground Railroad site. The artist who ran the museum was an ardent abolitionist, I'll use that word, but actually he was a radical abolitionist. And we were really fortunate to have so many records and pieces and parts. And so we did 2 documentaries while I was working there, one on suffrage I produced and one on Sheldon Peck as an abolitionist, and then wrote a couple books about his art, or one book about his art and another different history book, and did a $1 million exhibit about his art, and went from there. So a lot of different parts and pieces I've been given the opportunity to do. And then my family decided to relocate out of Illinois, and we landed in Columbus and at the Kelton House. So that's what I'm there. I do see one question that has popped up about Pearl, the sister. Is there any information as to what happened to the sister? And sort of. So the story I've seen is that Pearl went on and left her sister behind with the Keltons. And so doing research back, every piece of research that we can find actually kind of circles back to stories that the Kelton House has shared publicly, and there's no really independent documentation. So I reached out to the family and I said, what do you know? And she said, well, talking to my mother, the woman I talked to, her name's Roseanne, she's the great-granddaughter of Martha. And she said, my mother traveled by train to go see her Aunt Pearl, or her great Aunt Pearl, Martha's sister. So she went, Martha, as a woman before 1924, before she passed away, took a train to go see her sister in Wisconsin. Unfortunately, nobody knows her last name because, of course, she could have been married. There's no Pearl Hartway that we can find in Wisconsin, but eventually we may be able, if documents are uploaded, we may be able to find some more. But Wisconsin's a big state, so that's all we know. Is at one point before 1924, she lived in Wisconsin. So she may have gone to Canada and come back, or she may have never made it to Canada. She may have just stayed there. But that's the information, because I thought Pearl didn't exist. I'm like, is there really a Pearl? Because, it could have been stated, but that information comes directly from the family. And when it comes to family lore, there's certain ways to, and I want to kind of say this delicately. You can, many times in history, as a historian or as a family historian, not necessarily a professional historian, you may find things that certain family members have have a really lively storytelling part of their gene. And some people just tell the facts. So when you get somebody that has giant storytelling abilities and suddenly finding that's not quite right, and that story she told, we know that's not right, then it kind of leaves everything in this weird haze of, sorry, but if Grace Kelton said it, I have to find a second source, because Grace told a lot of great stories. So now we're trying to backtrack and make sure the things that Grace said are actually true and trying to confirm and go through there. So, but yeah, I haven't necessarily had a typical museum studies background.
Yeah. Do you know of any other families or people that the Keltons helped?
No. No, I don't know of anyone else. That is the only case that we know specifically of. But as I'm finding, and since I'm new, everything is like new and exciting. All this history is like, oh my gosh. And I feel like I'm the first person to ever read it or see it because it's new to me. But what's really interesting is Town Street, the street they lived on, was a very active place for anti-slavery work. There was a Free Black church on Town Street, just about 3 blocks down from the Kelton House. There was newspaper articles about bounty hunters coming to try to kidnap a woman named Rosanna Armistead, who is being sheltered there. So there's interesting things happening on their street. So we don't know of anybody else specifically. Thankfully, we do know Martha and her story. We don't know if there's any other Keltons I know there's other Keltons that have been very active with the Kelton House over the years, but since Grace didn't have any children, two of her other sisters were not married. Grace only had one niece and one nephew, and that's just from Edwin's line. So those Keltons, and I live in New Hampshire and California, so not a lot that have stayed in Ohio. There is family members also, though, from Frank's side of the family that have stopped by since I've been there, but it's actually from Frank's mother's side, so we're not quite sure exactly where everybody's from.
Okay, so that answers the next question. Are there any Keltons still in the
Yes,
area?
I saw that. Yeah. Wrapping that in there. So
yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about what you are doing at the Kelton House right now?
Absolutely.
Since you are open.
We are open. We are open every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from 1 to 4 for tours. If you are not, if you're not necessarily wanting to come and chance that somebody else will be at the same tour as you, you can make a private, you can come before hours, after hours, or on Wednesdays and Thursdays. So we do private tours all the time. There's no additional charge. It's just, come when you're comfortable. So we do that, but we haven't been doing a lot of programming because we are open to the public during the day. So we do want to encourage people to come in safely if they can. And then we're leaving it to the Sutliff Museum to do a lot of the virtual programming that I think people are really yearn for as well. So we do a lot of in-person still, but our groups don't get any larger than 10. So we also have a very lively event space rental. So we do weddings throughout the year. Our last wedding was in December, and then we start up again next month. Even our December wedding was outside in the snow, and it was lovely and wonderful. And that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to get married outside in December, and we can accommodate. So, and we do make sure everything is safe and COVID safe. So we are following all those rules, but lots of weddings and lots of events, and people still are finding ways to celebrate their lives and their life events in a safe manner. So we are starting up, we're doing a fun Bridgerton event, a Bridgerton tea. I know. So if you don't know what Bridgerton is, it's a wacky TV show on Netflix that's very popular right now. And so we're going to be doing a Bridgerton tea on a Sunday afternoon in June. So that's,
and you can send me that information.
I will send you that. You'll have to come in a fun costume. It'll be great. We're going to all dress up and maybe drink mimosas on the patio or something. I don't know. Haven't gotten that far yet, but it'll be great. So so we are continually doing research. We're updating our exhibits, and we are working with a lot of different historians on a walking tour of to keep us all outside and safe on Town Street, to talk about the history of Town Street and how that relates to the anti-slavery movement and the Underground Railroad. And so we're working on that because our museum's mission is to talk about decorative arts and local history. And local history is just not to talk about the Keltons. Keltons is just one way that we're able to use the story of Columbus in a personal way. So we can talk about different things of the house, but it's not a Kelton museum, it's a local history museum. So it does lead to what was going on Town Street. And so there's a governor, the Governor Todd lived just a couple doors down. So if the Keltons are harboring freedom seekers, either one of two things, either it's ridiculously risky, and they're trying to hide it from the governor, which is one of their close friends, or, well, actually three things. The governor knew about it. Yep. Could be. Or number three, it could be that everybody kind of knew, but it's the Keltons. Everybody loved Fernando Kelton. The whole city shut down when he died in 1866. There was 166 carriages at his funeral procession. He was, I think it was 166. It was some huge number for that time. So people loved him, so it doesn't mean that people didn't know what they were doing. And for goodness sakes, Martha Kelton lived there from 1864 until 1874. She lived there, no, till 76. She lived there for 12 years, 10 years as a single woman plus 2 more years as as a married as a married couple. Their family, these families are so intertwined, which is such a huge part of history that I think you think of 1874 and you think everything is 100% segregated.
Mhm.
And that wasn't the case. So they lived together. They raised their children together. They were very close families. Ella Kelton, she married a guy named James Watson. She was one of the daughters. Ella and her husband gave a house to the Thomases, or to the Lawrences, Thomas Lawrence. So they were all very well entrenched in each other's lives. So it's not that it's, of course, in 1864 Martha was hiding. 1864 is not safe. 1865 freedom is finally abolished completely, and then but still there could have been that stigma, but at the same time the Keltons had clout, and so were people going to say something to them? Maybe, maybe not. They might have lost some friends and colleagues over it, but maybe, maybe not. Whether anybody would actually bold enough to come to this very large gentleman who's very well known in the city, to call him out on what they were doing. So,
well, thank you so much for sharing the Kelton House and what you're doing and the history.